No one notices a shadow until something fails to cast one. That is the strange truth of it. Shadows are expected. They are background details. They belong to things in the same way weight does, or texture, or sound. You do not look for them. You assume they will be there. Which is why the traveler did not stop at first. He was driving west, following a narrow state road that curved through farmland and thinning forest. Late afternoon sunlight leaned low, stretching everything it touched. Fence posts cast long black lines across the dust. Telephone poles dragged dark stripes across the asphalt. Even the weeds along the roadside threw crooked, trembling silhouettes against the earth. The traveler noticed all of this without thinking. Then he noticed the church. It stood a short distance back from the road, beyond a sagging wooden fence and a small, uneven graveyard. A simple structure, white-painted boards, a narrow steeple, no stained glass, no ornamentation, the kind of rural church that barely registered as a landmark. Except for one thing, it did not cast a shadow. The traveler slowed the car without realizing he had touched the brake. Sunlight fell directly on the front of the building, bright and unbroken. The grass at its base was evenly lit. The fence behind it showed no interruption of light. The gravestones nearby threw long, crooked shadows toward the trees, but the church itself did not. For a moment, the traveler assumed it was an illusion, a trick of the angle, a quirk of the slope. He pulled the car to the shoulder and stepped out, the sound of the engine ticking softly as it cooled. The air was still. No wind, no insects, just the quiet hum of late afternoon. He walked a few steps closer, squinting, shifting his position. He crouched slightly, then stood again. He moved left, then right. Nothing changed. The church absorbed the sunlight without resistance, without interruption. Light touched it and simply ended. The traveler felt a brief, irrational embarrassment, as though he were misunderstanding something obvious. He checked his watch. Still daylight. He looked back at the road. The trees, the fence. Everything else behaved as it should. Only the church refused to participate. He told himself there was probably a reasonable explanation. A trick of paint, an optical effect, some peculiarity of reflection. But the longer he stood there, the harder it became to hold onto that thought. The absence felt deliberate, as though the building had made a choice. He noticed then that the church had no sign, no name, no schedule posted near the entrance. The door was closed, its surface weathered smooth by decades of sun and rain. 3 steps led up to it. Those steps cast shadows. The door frame cast a shadow inward. The church itself did not. The traveler turned toward the graveyard. The stones were old, older than the paint on the church suggested. Some had sunk deep into the soil, tilted at uncomfortable angles. Others were cracked clean through, their names eroded beyond recognition. A few stood newer and straighter with dates that felt oddly recent. He noticed something else. The gravestones closest to the church were positioned carefully, almost evenly spaced, as though arranged with intention rather than necessity. And all of them, every single one, faced away from the building. Not one stone was turned toward it. A flicker of unease passed through him. The feeling was subtle, easy to dismiss, but it lingered. He had the strange impression of being watched, though there were no windows on the front of the church and no movement anywhere in the field. After a moment, he returned to the car. The sensible thing, he told himself, was to ask someone local. Small towns always had explanations for their oddities. Traditions, stories, practical answers wrapped in casual familiarity. He drove on. The town appeared less than a mile down the road. Just a handful of buildings gathered around a 4-way intersection. A gas station, a diner, a hardware store with sun-faded lettering. A post office that looked more like a converted house than a government building. The traveler parked near the diner. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and frying oil. A bell chimed as he opened the door. 3 people looked up briefly, then returned to what they were doing. He took a seat at the counter. The waitress was older, her movements unhurried, her expression polite but distant. She poured coffee without asking and slid the mug toward him. "Passing through?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Just noticed something back up the road." Her hand paused for half a second. "What did you notice?" He hesitated. Something in her tone suggested the answer mattered more than the question. Still, he said it. "There's a church," he said. "It doesn't cast a shadow." The waitress did not look surprised. She did not look confused. She looked tired. "That's so," she said, and moved on to the next customer. The man 2 stools down cleared his throat. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a cap pulled low. He did not turn his head. "You didn't see that," the man said quietly. "I'm pretty sure I did," the traveler replied. The man finally looked at him. His eyes were sharp, assessing. "No," he said again. "You didn't." The diner fell into a brief, uncomfortable silence. Even the cook in the back seemed to pause. The traveler felt suddenly conspicuous, as though he had broken an unspoken rule. "I just thought it was strange," he said. "I assumed there might be a story." The waitress returned, setting down a plate with a little more force than necessary. "There's no story," she said. "You eat your food, you finish your coffee, and you don't go back there." The traveler opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The words he had planned felt inappropriate now, like a joke told at a funeral. He ate in silence. When he paid and stood to leave, the waitress spoke again. "If you're staying the night," she said, not meeting his eyes, "keep your curtains closed at sunset." "Why?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because that's when people start noticing things," she said. Outside, the sun hung low in the sky. The traveler glanced back up the road, toward where the church waited quietly among the trees. For the first time since he'd seen it, he wondered how long it had been there, and why no one remembered putting it there at all. The town, like the church, resisted attention. Its streets were narrow, uneven, lined with houses that seemed older than their paint suggested. Some leaned at impossible angles, held upright only by faith or by chance. Mailboxes sagged. Fences sagged. Even the shadows of ordinary objects seemed reluctant to obey the sun. The traveler wandered among the houses, hoping to find someone willing to explain, or at least to confirm the story of the church. But the people he encountered moved with a deliberate quietness, almost rehearsed, as if each step were accounted for in some unseen ledger. He asked about the town's history. "Oh, it's old enough," said a man tending a small garden, a spade in hand. "Been here longer than anyone can remember." "How long exactly?" the traveler pressed. The man paused. "Longer than the records show," he said finally, and returned to digging. The traveler noticed the dates on the gravestones again. Some recent, some decades old, but no pattern. Some names appeared, then vanished. Others repeated across generations, though the dates did not align. Names that belonged to people the traveler had never met, people the locals seemed not to remember. He approached the town hall, a low building of gray brick. Inside, the clerk looked at him over the counter, expression neutral. "You're asking about the church," the clerk said before he could speak. "Yes," said the traveler. "I saw it back on the road. It doesn't cast a shadow." The clerk's eyes flickered for the briefest moment. He closed a ledger slowly, as though reluctant to continue. "You saw what you saw," he said. "That's enough. The church isn't for strangers." "Not for strangers?" the traveler repeated. "It's just a building." The clerk shook his head. "It isn't a building. Not really. Not the way you think. It belongs to this place, to the town, and in its own way it watches." The traveler shivered. He wanted to ask more, about the foundation, about when it was built, about who built it, but the clerk turned to another customer, leaving the words dangling. Outside, the sun began its descent. Shadows stretched, elongated across fences, gravestones, and trees. Yet the church remained a bright, solid form in the dimming light, untouched by shadow. The traveler returned to the diner, hoping for more answers. He asked again about the people who lived here, about the town's founders, about any previous churches in the area. The waitress served his coffee without looking up. "This town isn't like others," she said. "Things happen here that don't happen anywhere else. You won't understand it, and you're not meant to." He tried anyway. He asked about old maps, county records, anything that might place the church in time. She shook her head. "They were never written down," she said, "or they were removed." That night, the traveler stayed at the small inn near the center of town. The innkeeper, an elderly man with a faint stoop, nodded when he asked about the church. "People here respect it," the innkeeper said. "Attend, keep quiet. That's enough. Some things are older than memory, older than laws. You don't question them. You don't photograph them. You don't count the steps you take near them. You just exist." From the window of his room, the traveler saw the church once more. Its outline was sharp against the fading light, solid white, glowing faintly in the amber haze of sunset. Not a shadow, not a flicker, not a hint of darkness where one should be. Sleep came fitfully, troubled by dreams of movement in the church. Shadows that weren't there stretched across him, pressing down with weight, whispering names he did not recognize. Names he might have known in another life, if the town allowed such things. When morning arrived, he walked the streets again. Some residents watched him silently from doorways. Others crossed to the other side of the road. No one spoke of the church openly. He discovered a small cemetery behind the town, a separate plot from the one along the road. Here the gravestones were orderly, neat, all aligned in perfect rows. But again, some names repeated strangely. Some dates were impossible. Children buried decades before their time, adults who should not have been born yet. It occurred to the traveler then, with a cold certainty, that the town itself might be shaped by the church, that the lives of the people, the very structure of the place, moved in tandem with it, invisible and unquestioned. He asked about the preacher, the one who held services in the white church with no shadow. "She's new," said the innkeeper. "Every few years, there's a new one. They come, they serve, they leave, or disappear, disappear." The word hovered, weightless yet suffocating. The traveler did not ask further. He felt a sudden urge to return to the road, to the familiar lines of asphalt and trees, to the ordinary shadows of the ordinary world. But curiosity anchored him heavier than fear. At noon he returned to the church. The building remained silent, unmoving. He walked around it slowly, noting every angle, every surface. He looked for seams in the boards, for any hint of windows or cracks, for some explanation of the impossible absence of shadow. He found none. And as he circled, he noticed the doors. One at the front, simple and closed. One at the side, obscured by the sun. And beneath the pulpit inside, though he could not see it clearly from outside, he imagined a basement. He did not know why he imagined it. There was no sign, no indication, no reason. But he could feel it. Something waited below. And whatever it was older than the town. The next morning, the traveler found himself standing outside the church again. Drawn by a curiosity he neither understood nor wanted to admit. The building seemed ordinary now in its stillness, yet the impossibility of its presence, the fact that it absorbed sunlight instead of casting a shadow, kept pulling at him like a faint but insistent tug. He stepped inside. The interior was deceptively simple. Wooden pews stretched in neat rows. The floorboards creaked softly underfoot. A small pulpit stood at the far end, bathed in the soft glow of light filtering through the windows, though, oddly, it seemed no true sunlight reached it. The church smelled faintly of old wood and something else, something faintly metallic. A few people were already seated. They did not look up as he entered. They whispered among themselves in low murmurs, but their words were indistinct, like the distant sound of wind through a hollow tree. The preacher arrived quietly. She was a young woman, tall, with pale skin and dark hair. She walked to the pulpit with the measured grace of someone who had done this before, though the traveler knew she could not have. He had been told there was always a new preacher every few years. She opened a large book, the pages yellowed with age. The traveler leaned forward, curious. She did not speak immediately. She only looked at the congregation. And they looked back, eyes fixed, unblinking, almost too still. Then she began to speak. Her words were not a sermon in the traditional sense. She did not read scripture. She did not speak of God or sin or salvation. She spoke instead in generalities, statements that seemed innocuous at first. Some things are seen, she said. Some things are unseen. Some things matter. Some things do not. Some names are spoken. Some names are known. Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic, and the congregation murmured assent at intervals. The traveler felt a chill. There was no heat in the room, no draft, yet the air seemed to press down on him. He noticed the people in the pews. Their heads tilted slightly, a subtle uniformity. Children, perhaps no more than 8 or 9, sat rigid, silent. Adults shifted almost imperceptibly, like leaves in a still breeze. The preacher continued, her words flowing in deliberate rhythm. "You are already known," she said, and then she repeated it. "You are already known." It seemed at first like a benign phrase, a mantra perhaps, but the longer she spoke, the heavier it felt, as though the words were weight pressing into the traveler's chest. He watched as one of the elders nodded slowly, the lines of his face deepening with each repetition. Another adjusted a hand on a pew, not touching anything but appearing to measure a space in the air, as if confirming the presence of something invisible. The traveler realized he could hear something beneath the sermon. A faint humming, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, but deep, slow, and steady. It was not coming from the preacher or the congregation. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. The preacher's voice rose and fell in cadence with the humming. "You have names you do not know. You carry them still. They follow you here. They will remain." The traveler wanted to speak, to ask what she meant, but his throat had gone dry. He realized he was not alone in his silence. Others in the pews seemed equally immobilized, caught in the gentle but unrelenting grip of her words. He noticed a small altar at the back of the church. Candles flickered, though there was no wind to move them. Their flames danced subtly, but always in patterns that mirrored the congregation's movements. Every slight nod, every measured shift of weight was echoed in the tiny, wavering lights. The sermon continued for what felt like hours, though in truth it was only a portion of the morning. The preacher spoke of shadows and light, of names remembered and names forgotten, of time that flows differently inside certain walls. "You do not leave," she said suddenly, and the congregation nodded in unison. "You only exist. Your presence feeds. Your attention shapes. You are here, and that is enough." The traveler's heart pounded. He wanted to leave, but his body refused. It was as if the church itself had anchored him to the floor. Every step toward the door felt impossible, every glance outside the windows futile. He looked around and saw the children again. One of them, a small boy near the front, lifted his head slowly. His eyes were unervingly pale, almost glowing in the muted light. He smiled faintly at the traveler, a smile that seemed both knowing and impossibly old. "You will stay," the child said softly, not to him, but as if stating a fact that needed no question. The preacher continued, pacing slowly along the front pews now, not looking at anyone in particular, only measuring the space. "Names appear. Names vanish. They are neither alive nor dead. They are here, beneath the boards, behind the walls, in the light that never casts a shadow. You may enter. You may listen. But you do not leave." The traveler felt a wave of vertigo. He stumbled toward the door, trying to resist, but every step was measured, every breath accounted for. The humming beneath the words grew louder, vibrating through his chest. He wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the sermon ended. The preacher closed the book, and the congregation rose. They filed out in orderly silence, leaving the traveler alone. The church was still again, the faint hum fading, leaving only the sound of the wooden floorboards beneath his feet. The absence of shadow felt sharper than ever. The sunlight outside reached the building as before, yet still no darkness fell. The traveler stepped outside, gasping for air, and for a moment believed he had escaped. But when he turned to look back, he noticed something new. The pews, visible through the open doors, seemed arranged differently. Slightly, almost imperceptibly, yet enough that it suggested something had moved. Something unseen had been inside while the room appeared empty. He shivered. He knew now that the church was not simply a building. It was aware. It was patient. It measured the people who entered, kept what it wanted. And it did not cast a shadow because it had no need to, not while it was feeding on the presence of those inside. The traveler took a step back, toward the road, toward the sunlight, toward the world with shadows. And yet, even as he did, he felt the pull, faint but undeniable, as if the church itself was watching him go. The traveler returned the next day, despite every instinct screaming against it. The church stood quietly, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for him. The sunlight washed over its walls, yet, as always, no shadow fell. He hesitated at the door, then stepped inside. The pews were empty now, the silence profound. Dust motes floated in the thin shafts of light. The faint hum he had heard during the sermon yesterday seemed almost absent, but not gone entirely. It lingered like a soft pulse, barely perceptible, as though the church itself had inhaled and held its breath. He approached the pulpit. The wood was worn smooth from countless hands, but beneath it, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small, almost imperceptible latch. It was tucked under the front edge, blending with the grain. Curiosity outweighed fear. He pressed the latch. The floorboard lifted silently. Beneath it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. The smell that greeted him was damp, earthy, metallic. It was as though the building itself. The traveler turned back. The pews remained empty. No one had followed him. Yet a prickling sensation crawled across his skin, the feeling that he was no longer alone. He descended. The steps creaked softly underfoot, but he was certain the sound carried differently here, as if swallowed by the thick air. The walls were rough-hewn stone, cold and slick with age. The hum grew louder. It was no longer distant. It vibrated through his chest, through his legs, through the soles of his shoes. At the bottom of the staircase, he saw it. A long corridor, dimly lit by flickering lanterns whose flames had no real source. Along the walls were carved names. Scores of them, hundreds, stretching into the shadows. The letters were shallow but precise, each one perfectly formed. Some names he recognized, the names of the townspeople. Others he did not, but felt inexplicably familiar. Dates accompanied each name, many impossible. Some dated decades before the town itself had existed. Some were future dates. He traced a finger along a name. Samuel Hart. 1893 to 1893. A newborn. The date seemed arbitrary, yet inscribed with deliberate care. He stepped forward. The corridor ended at a door. Carvings, more elaborate than the names, covered its surface. Symbols he could not comprehend. Lines that curved impossibly, intersecting and overlapping in patterns that made his eyes water. He pressed his hand to the wood. The hum surged, resonating through him. He opened the door. Inside, the space was small but unnervingly tall. A single altar stood at the center, carved from dark wood. Candles flickered along its edges, though no air stirred them. Shadows pooled in the corners, but even here, there was an absence. The light that touched the altar seemed complete, unbroken, yet the darkness beyond did not exist as darkness, only as something else, something waiting. Around the altar were objects, books, vessels, and scraps of paper. He approached carefully. One of the books fell open at his feet. Its pages were blank, or so he thought. Then letters appeared, as though written by an invisible hand. The presence feeds, the shadowless gathers. Names are collected, names are returned, and still it waits. A chill ran through him. He stepped back. Something moved in the far corner of the room. A figure? He could not tell. It was too dark, yet he could feel it observing him. The hum grew into a vibration, filling the room, resonating through the altar, the walls, the floor. He realized with horror that the names carved into the corridor, the dates, the impossible inscriptions, they were not merely records. They were instructions, feeding the building itself, shaping it, maintaining it. And the preacher's words returned to him. You do not leave. You only exist. Your presence feeds. Your attention shapes. He understood now. The church was not a building. It was an entity. Consumed attention, presence, time. It held the town in its orbit, kept records, watched, measured, and absorbed life itself. A sound drew his gaze upward. The staircase above had shifted. It was no longer in the same place. He realized then that the church was alive, subtle but patient, rearranging itself to confound those who tried to understand it. He wanted to leave. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to retreat. But something held him in place. Curiosity, fear, a tether spun by the church itself? He could not tell. He stumbled back toward the staircase, toward the faint light above. And then he noticed the youngest carving on the altar's edge. His own name. It had appeared without reason. He had not written it. No one could have. And yet there it was. The hum surged once more, almost triumphant. He fled, scrambling up the stairs, through the pulpit, out into the sunlight. The church remained quiet. No shadows fell. But he knew without doubt that it had marked him. And he also knew that no one else in the town would speak of it. No one could, because they had already been claimed. The traveler did not sleep well that night. Images of the basement, the carved names, the altar haunted him. Every shadow or absence of one pressed on his mind, replaying in fragments. Even the familiar darkness of his room seemed somehow different, as though the absence of a shadow could reach him beyond the church's walls. By morning he returned. Not out of bravery, but necessity. Curiosity had become an unbearable weight, and he knew that understanding, or at least witnessing, was the only way to survive what he had glimpsed. He approached the church quietly. The sun was high, casting ordinary shadows across the town, across fences, trees, and gravestones. Every shadow except the church's. The building stood motionless, its white walls absorbing the light, its steeple piercing the sky without a hint of darkness. Inside, the pews were empty. The air smelled faintly of the candle wax he had seen in the basement. The hum was present but subtle, like a pulse deep in the floorboards. He approached the pulpit, compelled, and found the hidden latch again. The staircase to the basement seemed darker, deeper, more insistent than before. He descended. The carved names on the corridor walls seemed almost to shimmer in the faint light, each letter shifting imperceptibly as though breathing. He traced the inscriptions again, reading aloud the familiar ones. Samuel Hart, 1893 to 1893. Margaret Lyle, 1924 to 1924. Each repetition etched a subtle chill into him. At the end of the corridor, he reached the room beneath the altar. The altar itself had no changes. Yet the books and papers scattered across its surface were different. One book, large and leather-bound, rested open on a lectern. Its pages were filled now, not blank as before, but covered in neat columns of names, dates, and locations. He leaned closer. Some names were recognizable, townspeople past and present. Others were unknown to him, yet seemed familiar, hauntingly so, as if he had glimpsed them in dreams or fleeting memories he could not place. The dates were impossible. Some predated the town, the county, even the state. Others were in the future, decades ahead. And then he saw it. A series of names, all marked with a small symbol he did not understand. Dates that had not yet arrived. The traveler realized with horror that the church was keeping a record not just of the living, but of the yet-to-be-born, of the missing, of the vanished. He ran his hand across the nearest page. The letters were carved into the paper itself, as though the book was part of the same living entity as the building. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, almost insistent, and he felt the vibration in his chest and legs, an echo of some immense presence. The preacher's words returned to him. You do not leave. You only exist. Your presence feeds. Your attention shapes. He turned the page. A name caught his eye, one he recognized from his fleeting thoughts upon entering the town. His own. No, it could not be. He had not come here yet. He had not been claimed. Yet the symbol was there, next to the name, etched with the same precise hand as all the others. He stumbled backward, nearly falling against the altar. The candles flickered, though no wind stirred them. Their flames danced in patterns that mirrored his racing heartbeat. A whisper brushed his ear, faint, indistinct, yet unmistakable. You are already known. He spun, but no one was there. The room was empty. The pews above, the corridor behind, the basement beyond, all silent. Yet he could feel it watching, measuring, recording. He opened another book. The pages contained diagrams of the town, drawn not in proportion but in intent, mapping streets, houses, the cemetery, and the church. Lines connected the graves to the building, and the names carved along the walls were marked along these lines, linking the living, the dead, and the unborn. It was a ledger of life itself. Not just this town, but a network of existence, measured and maintained by the shadowless church. The traveler realized the truth. This place was not just a church. It was a collector of life. Its foundation, its walls, its light-absorbing structure. Every part was designed to hold, measure, and feed on the presence of those who entered. Every sermon, every hymn, every whispered name reinforced the structure, strengthened the building, made it eternal. And the people, the townsfolk, they were participants willingly or unwillingly. Their attendance, their observation, their very attention fueled the church. He stumbled back, feeling the room shift around him. The corridor seemed longer, the stairs steeper. The names along the walls multiplied before his eyes, as if the building itself had added them while he was distracted. Panic welled in him, but he fought it, forcing himself to observe, to remember, to understand. If he did not, he might become just another name on the altar's ledger. He took a step toward the staircase, planning to leave, and then he noticed a new page in the book before him. It contained instructions, simple phrases repeated like a mantra. Observe, record, tend, feed. The letters glimmered faintly, as though alive. He understood then that this was how the church maintained itself. Every act of attention, every visitor, every whispered remark was woven into its architecture, recorded on its pages, absorbed into its shadowless walls. He realized with a deep, sinking horror that he had already begun to participate simply by being here, by reading the names, by noticing the altar, the pages, the diagrams, by acknowledging its existence. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards, the walls, even his own body, pulsed, rhythmic, insistent. The church did not need to chase him. It had already ensnared him. And somewhere, deep in the folds of the ledger, he knew his name would remain. The traveler did not leave that morning. He could not yet. He was drawn back inexorably, as though some invisible tether had been fastened to him, binding him to the church's impossible presence. The shadowless walls stood in the sunlight, serene, unmoving, yet impossibly alive. He entered, the familiar hum vibrating faintly beneath his feet, like a pulse from the earth itself. The pews were empty. Dust motes drifted lazily in the beams of light, and still, the building reflected none of it as shadow. Every surface gleamed unnaturally, pure white, untouched by darkness. He moved toward the pulpit again, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity he no longer distinguished. The latch was there, always there. He descended into the basement, each step echoing in the silent, heavy air. The carved names on the corridor walls seemed almost to shimmer with anticipation. Some twisted slightly, like letters drawn in water, but each remained perfectly legible. He traced them again, scanning for new names. There were many, too many. Names of the living, names of the dead, names of people yet to exist. The altar room lay before him, and now he understood. The church had no shadow because it was not a building in the ordinary sense. It did not block light. It absorbed it, drawing energy from the world outside and converting it into something else entirely. Presence, attention, consciousness, it consumed all of it. Every visitor, every whispered name, every observation strengthened it, made it eternal. The preacher's mantra returned to him. You do not leave. You only exist. Your presence feeds. Your attention shapes. It was literal. Every being who entered contributed to the church's existence, wove themselves into its architecture, and became a permanent thread in the web it maintained. The traveler walked the room slowly, noticing for the first time the subtle motion of the altar itself. The wood seemed to pulse, ever so slightly, like a heartbeat. The candles flickered in impossible rhythm, forming patterns that echoed the carved names in the corridor. He realized that the church did not merely absorb presence. It shaped it, bending lives, histories, and even the passage of time to its will. The town had been built around it. Its people were part of its maintenance, whether they knew it or not. Children learned to sit still in pews not because of discipline, but because the church demanded it. Families lived, died, and repeated cycles without questioning the invisible force that tethered them. He turned toward the books, filled with names and dates, diagrams of the town, and strange symbols. Here lay the proof of the church's reach. It recorded all life within its orbit, measured it, and returned it in patterns beyond human comprehension. Life was a ledger. Existence was a currency. Then he saw it. A section of the ledger glimmered faintly, names not yet born, future visitors, new residents, people who would cross the church's path decades from now. The traveler's pulse quickened as he recognized some of the names. They were familiar yet impossible, as though he had glimpsed them in a dream or memory that did not belong to him. And at the bottom of the page, his own name appeared again, now accompanied by a date in the near future. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was already claimed. He could not leave. He had been recorded, measured, and folded into the church's pattern the moment he stepped into its lightless shadow. A whisper floated through the room, faint but unmistakable. You are here. You are known. You feed. You shape. He backed away toward the staircase, his chest tight, his mind reeling. But the staircase had shifted again. A subtle but undeniable movement that made the path to escape longer, steeper, more uncertain. The hum grew louder, vibrating through every inch of the building. The church was aware of him, measuring his attention, cataloging his fear, integrating him into its existence. He understood then that no one truly left the church once they had been claimed. They might walk the streets outside. They might speak with others. But a part of them, their presence, their attention, their consciousness, remained inside, preserved, recorded, feeding the building, sustaining it. The preacher's words were no longer just warnings. They were a description of reality. You do not leave. You only exist. Your presence feeds. Your attention shapes. He stumbled up the stairs, out of the pulpit, into the sunlight. The street outside was ordinary. Shadows stretched across fences, trees, gravestones. Everything behaved as it should, except the church. It remained bright, pure, immovable, absorbing the light without casting a shadow. The traveler fled down the road, his mind spinning. He glanced back. The building waited, patient, eternal. And somewhere, deep within its walls, his name was recorded, as it would be forever. The traveler did not sleep that night. Every shadow in his room seemed suspicious, every flicker of light a warning. He could not shake the feeling that the church followed him, even from miles away. Its shadowless walls were etched into his mind, luminous and impossible. The next morning he returned again, not because he wanted to, but because he could not resist. It was a compulsion, subtle but undeniable. The church had measured him, marked him, and now it called. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated lazily in shafts of sunlight, yet still, the building cast no shadow. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed faintly, a heartbeat that belonged not to him but to the structure itself. He approached the pulpit, the latch, the basement. The names along the corridor walls seemed sharper now, clearer, as if they had multiplied overnight. Every name was a story, every story a thread, every thread feeding the church's being. He descended into the basement once more, drawn to the altar. The books lay open, pages filled with names and dates, diagrams of the town, and strange symbols that defied comprehension. He read aloud a few names. The humming grew louder, stronger, vibrating through him. And then he saw it. A section of the ledger, empty just moments ago, now filled with new names. Names that had not existed before. Names he recognized. People who had not yet entered the church, whose lives were already accounted for. He realized the cycle. The church collected names, fed on attention, waited patiently, and then returned to the surface, subtly shaping lives in its orbit. Each visitor became both participant and victim, sustaining the building's eternal existence. The preacher appeared at the top of the stairs, calm and unreadable. She did not speak, yet the words echoed in his mind. You do not leave. You only exist. Your presence feeds. Your attention shapes. He understood then that resistance was meaningless. The church was older than memory, older than the town, older than the lives it recorded. It did not need to chase him. It already held him, as it held everyone who had entered. The traveler fled the basement, up the staircase, through the pulpit, out into the sunlight. For a moment he believed he had escaped. The streets of the town stretched before him, ordinary, mundane, filled with shadows. Everything obeyed the light, everything except the church. He turned back once more. The white walls gleamed impossibly, absorbing the sun, casting no shadow. It waited, patient, eternal. He knew now that no one ever truly left the church. Those who visited might walk the streets, speak to neighbors, live ordinary lives. But part of them, names, presence, attention, remained inside, feeding, shaping, sustaining the building. And the cycle continued. Every sermon, every whisper, every gaze contributed. The church's walls absorbed all life around it, storing it, shaping it, rendering it eternal. The traveler ran down the road, but he knew he was marked. His presence would return, even if he never stepped inside again. His name was already etched into the ledger, recorded in the pulse of the building itself, feeding the shadowless light that refused to die. From a distance, the church appeared serene, quiet, benign, but it was anything but. It waited for the next visitor, the next observer, the next name. And when they arrived, it would feed again. The sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. The fence, the gravestones, the distant barns all fell into darkness. All except the church. It remained bright, unshadowed, watching, waiting. And somewhere within its walls, the traveler's name glimmered faintly on the ledger. A reminder. He did not leave. He only existed. His presence fed. His attention shaped. The church was eternal, and it would never be alone.